Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Shattered by Dean Koontz. Now, Shattered was published in 1973, and this was originally published under Dean Koontz's pen name, K.R. Dwyer. Now, I have Shattered in this collection here, which comes with 3 books by Dean Koontz, and those books are Shattered, Whispers, and Watchers. Now, I haven't read Whispers yet, but I have read Watchers, and Watchers may very well be my favorite Dean Koontz novel. Now, Shattered is about this guy named Alex Doyle, who, him and his wife Courtney, and his wife's 11-year-old brother Colin move from Philadelphia to San Francisco. Now, his wife already takes a plane out to their house in San Francisco, but him and his brother-in-law Colin decide to take a road trip all the way from Philadelphia to San Francisco. But what happens is, as Alex and Colin are driving from state to state, they start getting followed by this maniac in a van, and he keeps following them, and throughout the course of the story you realize that this maniac intends to kill them. And that's the basic plot line of Shattered. There's a lot more to it than just that, but that's all I want to say about the plot line of this novel. Now, Shattered was a really good book. I definitely can't say it's one of Dean Koontz's better books. Like, he's definitely written better books than this, but this was still a really good one, though, and definitely I would say is one of the better of Dean Koontz's earlier novels, because I haven't read too many of Dean Koontz's earlier works, but I've read a few of them, like The Vision, which was published in 1977, and I freaking hated The Vision. Like, The Vision was probably my least favorite Dean Koontz novel, but he's also written books like Chase, which I love, around this time. So back in like the 1970s, it seems like Dean Koontz was very hit or miss. I really feel like the 1980s is when Dean Koontz really came into his own. But once again, Shattered is a really good book. Not necessarily a great book, but definitely a really good book, though, and it's a pretty fast-paced book, too. Like, depending on how fast of a reader you are, you could probably read through this book in a day. Like, it's a really quick read. Like, it gets in, does its thing, and gets out. And I actually saw a lot of similarities between this book and the Richard Matheson short story Duel, which was about a man who was being terrorized on the road by a maniac driving a truck. Like, this book definitely had a lot of similarities to the Richard Matheson short story. The main difference, though, between this book and the Richard Matheson story Duel is, in Duel, you never saw this maniac who was driving the truck. In this book, you really do get to know the main villain. Like, you really do get to know this maniac who is driving this van and pursuing Alex and Colin. And this book really does get inside the head of the main villain, and you really come to understand why he's doing what he's doing, and you almost sympathize with him. Like, it still doesn't excuse his actions, but you kinda get what's making him this crazy. Like, you realize that this is a guy with a lot of deep psychological and emotional problems, and it turns out a lot of these problems that are causing him to do this are not all mental. Some of them are actually physical, so you do actually kind of sympathize with the main villain, while it still doesn't excuse his actions. And the two protagonists of this novel, Alex and Colin, are both very likable characters, and the character of Alex is constantly getting shit from people throughout this whole novel. Like, almost everywhere he goes, like, people treat him like crap because of the way he's dressed, and he has, like, long hair. Keep in mind, this book was written in the 70s, and this was the whole, like, hippie movement was going on at this time, so a lot of people are of like the old generation are giving him crap because of this, so he's constantly treated like garbage by people throughout the whole novel, even before he realizes that there's a maniac after him. And in this book, there's actually a lot of social commentary about the state that America was in during the time this book was written, because once again, this book was written in the 70s, and the late 60s and early 70s were a very turbulent time in America's history. And also, during this time, you had a lot of radical groups popping up all over America during this time. Like, society was really changing in the late 60s and early 70s. Now, towards the beginning of this novel, and this is kind of a minor spoiler, but towards the beginning of this novel, the main villain kills a cop, and throughout the novel, there's this detective who is investigating the murder of this cop. And this detective is somebody who's definitely of the older generation, and he definitely has a lot of conservative views, and basically he kind of feels like all these like liberal radical groups are destroying America in his eyes, and he's convinced that this cop's murder in the beginning of the novel was actually some kind of political assassination. Like, he's convinced that a member of a radical group killed this cop as to make some kind of political statement. And this detective is so convinced that this cop's murder was a political killing, but you as the reader realize that no, what the guy who killed him was just fucking crazy, and you kind of get the idea that people are always trying to find a rhyme or reason for why people do things, and they try to think, oh, it's something political, when in reality, people are just fucking crazy. So, while Shattered is a really good thriller, you could tell that Dean Koontz was trying to make kind of a commentary on the state America was in during the time he wrote this. But yeah, that's my review on Shattered by Dean Koontz, and bye.